Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Taxes and spending in Memphis. Will Wanda Halbert be removed? And much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists talking about some of the biggest stories of the week. Julia Baker covers public safety and criminal justice for us at the Daily Memphian. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you.
And Bill Dries, a reporter with the Daily Memphian. We'll start with you, Bill. It's tax season for the suburbs, for the city, for the county, but obviously the city of Memphis is making the biggest news now with Mayor Young in his first budget season proposing a 28% increase. That would be 75 cents increase. County, it's still got to go through council. Council's first meeting, I'll let you say, but I think was a little bit of skepticism. Do I have my numbers right, first and foremost? And how did we get here, and what is the challenge of such a dramatic increase in city taxes?
It's actually about a 23% increase in the property tax rate. If the 75 cents is passed, that is a huge question mark at this point, as well as being a really huge tax hike. If you look at the history of tax hikes, across the years, we haven't had one, first of all, for more than 8 years. Actually, I think the last one was in 2012. So,
yeah. And we've actually had decreases in the city taxes over the last decade.
Yes. Once you fit in the certified rate and what the state does to make sure that the tax rate produces the same amount of revenue, and then you can have a tax hike on top of that. But 75 cents is a whopper. On top of that, the budget also includes, it's technically not a part of the budget, but the city is seeking to raise the solid waste fee, which the city had raised 4 years ago from $29.96 to $36.85. So the council has a lot to figure out in their first budget season as well.
And some of the gap came from the end of various COVID money, COVID-related money from the federal government that was passing through. Some of it, though, it seems there was $10 million that, was for the firefighters. I think we talked about recently, and you and others at Daily Memphian reported on. But it just, again, what is the increase in spending that Paul Young is proposing? Is it salaries? Is it construction? Is it roads? What are those things that make up this gap?
It's all of those things. Mayor Young has told the council and he has told the public, if you want what the city has now, then this tax rate is fine. If you want the city to do more, if you want the city to expand programs, if you want longer community center hours, if you want your neighborhoods to be cleaner, if you want fewer potholes and more of them to be filled quicker, then 75 cents is what does that. So it's a very bold move, and there are a lot of different reactions to it.
I know Memphis Shelby County Schools was asking for some money from the city. Does that include some funding for them? The city, for those who've lost track, is not responsible for funding the school system. It's entirely under the county. But is the city going to put some money in?
Mayor Young has said he is considering it. It may not be the $25 million that Dr. Fagans, the new school superintendent, is considering. She is also asking Shelby County government for more money. This would primarily be capital funding, and the county, of course, has the 2 new schools that are to be constructed in Cordova and Frazier, which are both still on their plate, hopefully to get started in the fiscal year that begins July 1st.
And Memphis Shelby County Schools has asked the county for $200 million in school building and funding for school, either the new buildings, renovations, upgrades, deferred maintenance, and so on. Is there any sense yet of whether they're going to get that full $200? Not.
There is not.
Yeah.
There is not. There are a lot of discussions to take place on that. Much of what they're talking about with the city will be capital funding, and what happens with capital funding is if the city does it because it's one-time funding, then the city is not back into maintenance of effort funding, which is the state law that says if you're a local government and you fund a school system to this amount of money, you cannot go lower than that unless there's a significant drop in enrollment. And there's not right now for Memphis Shelby County Schools, that the enrollment is actually growing.
Let's briefly do the, Mayor Harris has put forward his budget for the Shelby County. It does not include a tax increase. It did include a significant increase in the commitment to the reconstruction, renovation, expansion of Regional 1, formerly the Med. We had Reginald Coopwood, the CEO of Regional 1, on last week talking about their plans, and it's kind of an 8 to 10 year plan to expand and really expand the services, make it an academic medical center in partnership with UT Health Science Center. That seems to be pretty well received by the County Commission to increase the commitment to Regional 1?
They have to figure out how to do it. And Dr. Coopwood made news on the show when he said that, because what he told you is that, well, we went to the state this year looking for the state share of funding, because the deal was supposed to be the county puts up $350 million, the first money in, on what's a $700 million to $1 million project. And then the state comes in, and then you have the arrangement where the state, through the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, is effectively the co-owners. Well, that didn't happen. So when Mayor Harris presented his budget on this, what he said is, okay, our commitment, I am proposing, is now going to be $500 million in capital funding toward the rebuild of the campus. The county is going to carry the first phase of this, and it's going to be $500 million over the next 10 years, so about $50 million a year is what he said. We should point out that Mayor Harris also included a 6% pay raise for county employees in his budget proposal too. So the commission has to figure out the logistics of what they want to do on Regional 1, and there's still to come some very significant discussions on whether the 2 new schools can go as part of that or whether they wait. Mayor Harris says it's not an either-or situation, that the county's committed to doing all 3 of these projects.
Okay. Let's bring you in, Julia. There's all kinds of things in your beat around. We'll talk some about funding. We'll talk about some, capital spending on facilities. But why don't we start with a roundup as the state, we mentioned the State House, whole lot of bills that went through and were passed that have impact statewide, but very much in Memphis. Many of which, not all of which, but we won't go into effect July 1st. That's a very typical thing with the legislature. Why don't you kind of go through the list, and we'll talk about that and some other things in public safety.
Yeah, so the legislature just ended a couple of weeks ago. A slew of criminal justice bills passed, many of them proposed by local legislators Brent Taylor and John Gillespie. One of those is a drag racing bill. It increases the level of felony of drag racing. One of our freelancers, Jody Callahan, did a really good series of stories on that and how that affects community members. Another one is the ability to pay has been taken away from consideration when a judicial commissioner sets the initial bail. So how that affects their current standing bail order agreement between ACLU and Just City and the county, that remains to be seen, and we're following up on that.
And we're also, just to interrupt you, Josh Spickler from Just City and some other folks involved that we'll have on the show in the coming weeks to talk really deeply about bail, which is always very heavy on people's minds. Misunderstandings about it, confusion, anger from all sides. Bail has been just this huge issue as we've gone through this increase and now beginning of a decrease in crime in Memphis. But keep going.
Yeah. Another one that passed is allowing teachers to carry guns. That was signed by the governor. So that is something that we're going to see. The teachers and school staff, they do have to get approval from officials in the school district before they can carry firearms. But that receives a lot of heat from people, Democrats in particular, who do not support that.
Yeah, will that go through the school boards? Is that how that's going to happen? I mean, is it because it goes into effect, so theoretically there will be schools. I mean, probably the reality is there'll be school systems in Tennessee. We don't know about Memphis or Shelby County. We'll have got armed teachers in the classroom starting in the next school year.
Right.
Will it and sorry to put you on the spot here, but is it the school board that has to approve this? Is it school administrators? What is that approval process?
I believe the school board does get a say in it, and I think also the superintendent does get a say in it.
Yeah.
And I think also the school principal.
Okay, all right, we'll have more on that. Bill, you're going to try.
And Dr. Fagans has said that's not going to be
The
the
new
case.
superintendent- the new
Yes,
superintendent from Memphis.
superintendent has said that's not going to be the case. And a number of the superintendents of the 6 suburban school systems have also said not here.
Yeah, and we'll probably try to get some superintendents on before the beginning of the new year to talk about this and all kinds of other things going on with education. The governor this week, the voucher bill, the huge expansion of vouchers in the state, did not pass this last session, but he said recently, I think this week, that he's going to push it again next year. It's been a huge priority for him. So we'll get some education folks on to talk about all these things, but keep going.
A couple of other big ones. Blended sentencing did pass. It was a version that was proposed by John Gillespie and Brent Taylor. So, if a youth is accused of, let's say carjacking, if they meet certain criteria, they could potentially serve an adult sentence that could either be probation or adult prison. And, it's interesting because they'll have before, an adult sentence, they are taken to adult criminal court to have a jury trial. And then they're sent back to juvenile court for juvenile sentencing, where they will determine the sentence. Another one is 2 local judgeships have been removed, and that's the Criminal Court Division 9, which was formerly occupied by Melissa Boyd, who has pleaded guilty to harassment charges and was removed from the bench before that seat was eliminated. And also Division 7 of the Circuit Court that was previously occupied by Mary Wagner, who is now in the Supreme Court.
I guess I just missed it. I never really understood why they were, a legislature that wanted to be tough on crime was removing one of the criminal courts. You could see why, given everything that has happened with that specific judge, that judge would be removed from the seat. But what was the justification for saying we don't even need that division?
Right, and that's something that some of our local legislators fought for. They were like, we need all the judges we can get. The reasoning was because they wanted to create an additional seat in the 4th Judicial District. And so they needed to kind of free up some funding for that seat.
Okay. Let's stay with criminal justice and some more local issues. And again, many of these issues that Julie brought up we'll be exploring with various people over the coming weeks and months as they have impact here in Memphis and Shelby County. There's a ton of news at juvenile court here in Memphis. Why don't you walk everyone through that?
Yeah, so the most recent developments is currently the juvenile court is closed because of mold and asbestos.
To be clear, the courthouse itself.
The courthouse.
You'll explain. Operations are happening, but in a very kind of scattered way.
Right, and not some proceedings are on hold right now, but what they can do remotely, they are doing remotely. So hopefully by Friday they'll see, they're going to have additional test results come in to see if they've been able to remedy some of the mold and asbestos that's, keeping them out of the building. They're potentially looking at a couple of temporary spaces. One could be the former Commercial Appeal building on Union. The other one could be the Division 9 courtroom that just got eliminated.
And to clarify, and you correct me if I'm wrong, this does not affect the detention center for juveniles who've been accused of crimes, and it doesn't, or convicted, I guess, but it's the courthouse itself.
Right.
All of it, speaks to, I think they had maybe 25 laptops, and they've got 120 staff. All the servers are in that building. They're not in the cloud, so they're having to go back in and out of there. Judge Sugarman, the relatively new juvenile court judge, has talked about how he inherited all these kind of problems, and this is just one more of them in terms of just all kinds of problems with the physical plant, with the filing, with the record keeping, with the electronics, with the computers, and so on.
Yeah. While the detention facility, moved out of that juvenile court building last summer, that is also having issues as well. The sheriff's office recently handed that back to the juvenile court. So, the juvenile court has a lot on its plate with taking on, the juvenile detention facility while dealing with the problems at the court building. But some of the, the youth there were not getting visitation or, sufficient educational facilities or, outdoor recreational opportunities. So we'll see, how the, juvenile court, addresses those problems.
This comes as there's a whole big conversation about a new jail, a replacement, or I think it's a replacement is the proposal at 201 Poplar. It's been talked about numerous times over the years, Bill. I mean, as an example right now, and I can't remember if you or someone else on staff, Julia, did the story that there are 100 broken locks on Shelby County Jail cell doors. I had to read that twice, even though it was in the paper that I ostensibly manage. And they have to pay overtime to guards to guard those cells that don't have locks. I mean, kind of without any debate, the fundamental point of a jail, at least for some people, is to have them behind a locked door.
Believe it or not, it's not the first time that they've had the problem with being able to pop locks out of the cell pods in the building. That problem has been there before when the building was younger, shall we say.
Yeah, and the building when it was built, was already outdated. I think it was finished built in 1981. And I think that speaks to why, the sheriff is really pushing for a new jail. I know the county commission recently approved a jail study, but that new jail wouldn't be built until probably 10 years from now. And, Sheriff Bonner likely won't even be in office at that point.
Neither will any of the people who would vote on it.
Right. There's also work going on mental health around the Justice Center, also a mental health facility that's going to open in January. Julie and I are interviewing some folks very much involved with that, including the County Commission Chairwoman. That's next week on Behind the Headlines, so tune in for that. We'll talk much more about the mental health and the investments that are being made there. And it kind of does speak to this whole, everyone's focused on, many people are focused on criminal justice and public safety, and then the sort of costs of it are sometimes undercovered by me at least. But if you read the Daily Memphian, not so much. They are covered there. Let's stay with criminal justice for a second and talk. The governor was in town this week, Bill, and I think Sam Hardiman on our staff asked him, is open carry the problem, the open carry with weapons? Are there going to be any changes to open carry? The legislators here in Memphis, I think widely, not unanimously, but widely across many parties and affiliations, would like to see tighter controls around guns, at least in Shelby County, if not the whole state. The governor said open carry is not the problem, the crime problem in Memphis. This comes as a number of things are going on with guns right now. There's a federal rule regarding who needs a license to sell firearms that could reduce gun access especially through gun shows, I believe, and private sales in Memphis. But attorney generals across the country, 21 of them, including the Tennessee Attorney General, are looking to overturn that new rule. And then two things. Let's do first. In August, there was a gun-related or a referendum on the ballot here in the city.
It's one of 5 ballot questions that the City Council put on the ballot last year. So voters will vote on this on the August ballot. Early voting, of course, starts in mid-July. But one of the questions is a rather unique referendum, as these things go, that the City Council voted to put on there. And in effect, what you have is a 3-part question on there. Do you want to see this, this, and this? And voters will kind of mix and match among those. They could vote for all 3, or they could vote for one of them, or they could vote for 2 of them. And what they would allow the city to do theoretically, very theoretically, is to basically opt out of open carry in Memphis. And you would have what amounts to an assault weapons ban going forward. It wouldn't apply retroactively. You would also have a requirement that guns be stored safely in cars. A lot of different options on it. And the council moved ahead with this, even though there were some pretty bleak signs of the state actually going for this.
Well, and you and I think we interviewed Jim Strickland, former mayor, now dean of the law school at the University of Memphis and a lawyer, and he said, in effect, I certainly would love to see that happen. I think it has zero chance to withstand the court challenges that will come.
And there was an attempt in the legislative session that just ended to do that, to have what amounts to a carve out for the state's major urban areas, including Memphis, and it got exactly nowhere.
Also on guns, the Steve Mulroy and Mayor Paul Young, DA Steve Mulroy, got together and are going to push for new limits or new laws around gun switches. Talk about that.
Yeah, so they're encouraging legislators to increase that charge from Class E to Class C, which would stiffen the penalties, because I think Class E, you get up to 6 years in prison and a fine of up to $3,000. But if it were a Class C felony, it would be 3 to 6 years, it would just increase the severity for that.
And I should have explained. Gun switches they're illegal, but they're widely available. I think you can get them online. They're everywhere. I'm not giving away any secrets here. And they will turn a semi-automatic weapon essentially into a machine gun. And they were used. The accusation or it's alleged that they were used in the tragic killing of Officer McKinney recently. There have been many, many instances. But the mayor and the DA would it would come back to the state, right? The state would have to up that felony level in the next session to give them a bit more tools to stop them. And didn't Kevin Ritz, the U.S. attorney, he also has put a big emphasis on switches. Am I right about that?
Yes, because it is illegal on the federal side and state side. And so while the federal court can, prosecute switch cases, they can't take on all of them. So the state also needs to have that increase as well.
With about 5 minutes left here, the saga bill that you have chronicled of Wanda Halbert took a turn this week. Hamilton County District Attorney General Cody Wamp, who was brought in by the state as a kind of outside review, has been looking at the office for months, making recommendations, and this past week or week and a half filed a petition to have Wanda Halbert removed. Where do we go from here, and what does that even mean?
There is a hearing in circuit court. First of all, the complaint from General Wamp over in Chattanooga incorporated a lot of the findings of the Tennessee Comptroller's report on the office, which talked about a lot of different problems with accurate financial reports and tracing where revenue is going. There were also some elements that we saw earlier. The backup that we saw of approval of car registration renewals, and the problems in particular that auto dealers had in getting title on those vehicles through the clerk's office. So a blend of both of those. And the next step will be, first of all, to find a circuit court judge.
And that will be local? That will be in Shelby County?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, a caveat on that. Initially, it was assigned to Circuit Court Judge Cedric Wooten. He has recused himself, and the case has now gone to Circuit Court Judge Felicia Corbin Johnson.
Here in Shelby County?
Here in Shelby County. There will be a hearing, the indication from the Comptroller's office, which had a very limited comment on all this after being very vocal in their criticism of Halbert earlier, has said, we're not going to say too much because possibly our audit team could be called to testify in this hearing.
I'm going to read from Wamp. And again, Wamp was brought in not because there was any malfeasance or any accusation of something going wrong in Hamilton County. It was just to have a more neutral party was the idea, right?
Right. The District Attorney General, Steve Mulroy, recused himself from the case.
Yeah. In Wamp's report, he said that he is seeking her removal because, quote, defendant willfully neglected to perform duties enjoined upon her by the laws of the state. Ms. Halbert's monthly reports are consistently inaccurate, with collected dollar amounts not added properly. The inaccurate reports are impossible for Shelby County government to rely on for the purposes of government funding distributions and funding requirements. At its best, in the past, there have been problems in the clerk's office before, but the clerk's office is one of those things you kind of don't think about. You go, you might have to stay in a line, you get your tags, you get your license. It's sort of it's the part of the bureaucracy that absolutely angers people when it doesn't work right. But the accusations are even more than that it's not just slow or inefficient. Where is all the money? It's not clear, right?
Well, the money is there.
Yeah, and I shouldn't imply that
by the county trustees.
Yeah, there's no accusation of theft, but just utter disorganization in the funding and handling of money.
The way this came to a head was the trustee said, look, I have to provide revenue figures to the Shelby County Commission, to the county mayor, so that they can plan a budget together.
Yeah.
And I can't do that because, first of all, the revenue figures are inaccurate on the initial report. When I send it back, I got a new report. Those figures were inaccurate. And then I sent it back and the figures were still inaccurate because the clerk was not counting the wheel tax hike that the commission passed a year ago, whose revenues go to build the 2 new schools and the rebuild of Regional 1 Health Center that we talked about earlier. And then Halbert responds to that by saying, well, I didn't even know the commission had passed it until well into July, so some people didn't pay it who were supposed to pay it. And those revenue figures determine whether those major projects get done. Now, one other note.
Yep.
There will be a hearing before the full hearing to determine if Halbert should be suspended from office pending the full adjudication of this.
And it goes through the courts. There's no. I mean, Mayor Harris has nothing to do with this. The governor. There's no boss for the county clerk. The county clerk's an elected official, and so is subject to the rules of law. I mean, there's no oversight or explicit oversight. It's fascinating.
Because the Shelby County Clerk is an elected official. Yeah. This is a very serious matter that involves basically overturning the results of an election.
All right. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you, Julia. That is all the time we have this week. If you missed any of the show, you can get the full episode at WKNO.org or Daily Memphian, or you can go to YouTube and search for Behind the Headlines. You can also download the full podcast of the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. We'll see you next week.